Welcome to the Divorce Allies podcast, a podcast and video series where we dive into all things divorce, the process of creating a settlement offer with a team of financial professionals, divorce mortgage, parenting, and relationship coaches. We cover all of the areas of the divorce settlement process from financial to emotional well-being. I'm Melissa Gragg, our financial mediator and negotiation specialist, and today I'm with Cristin Terri, our divorce coach and parenting specialist. Welcome, Cristin.
Hi, thanks for having me, Melissa.
So we are obviously two members of the Divorce Allies. So today we're going to be kind of more conversationally talking about a key aspect in the settlement agreement process, which is the parenting plan. And it's an interesting topic because what we see in not only working with couples in mediation or working with one spouse is that regardless of how complex the financial situation is, we will typically feel like the money is one of the most important topics, equally important, and the money covers a lot of things, but equally important is the children. And so recently, when we were working with a couple to get to a settlement agreement, which is a possibility to work together, we started heavy into the property statement, talking about the house, talking about, the income and expenses, talking about what potentially could be alimony and child support. And they were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Really, our priority right now is our children and figuring out a schedule around the holidays, a schedule around, the upcoming events or spring break or summer, and really having that clarity in where they're going to live, how we're going to get along, and how we're going to co-parent. So I think it's very interesting because even if you have a very complex situation, the kids could be a hyper priority. And in some capacity, when you're trying to deal with a settlement concept, it's pieces, right? The settlement offer is a bunch of pieces. And one of the pieces is the parenting plan. And within the parenting plan are a whole bunch of considerations about specific details of how you're going to co-parent. So when they're coming in initially, it's almost like we had to pause and say, okay, we're going to spend 1 or 2 or 3 sessions, and that's multiple sessions on talking through the parenting plan. So I think that before we get into like what is a full settlement offer, we're really starting to focus on the pieces of the offer, and a parenting plan is one of them. So Cristin, from your perspective, and a lot of times you could be dealing with an attorney that is filing for your divorce, a mediator that's helping you along, a financial expert that could be giving you, some knowledge and benefit. But the reality is all these people are just parents and they're not necessarily parenting specialists, and so understanding that is why we have Cristin as really a key part of the Divorce Allies. And so, Cristin, what exactly is a parenting plan and why do you talk about it? How do you talk about it? And why is it crucial in the divorce proceedings?
Yeah, so first of all, from my perspective as the parenting coach, it's a tool for reducing the stress for the children. It ensures consistency in their routines, which is vital for their emotional well-being, especially during the significant time of change. But what exactly is in the parenting plan? The parenting plan outlines the structure, who makes what decisions, legal, physical, custody, who's going to be paying for what, how long each child is going to be with each parent. It helps minimize misunderstandings. It helps keep the children's best interest at the forefront. And it minimizes that long-term conflict, because once the divorce is final and the finances are done and the house is sold, the longest standing conflict then going forward is the kids. And that's where the parenting plan comes into place, to minimize all that conflict, to make sure the children's best well-beings are at the forefront of both parents. And that may look different in the beginning until you reach an agreement.
Well, and I think that most of the time, because you have not only parenting plan templates, you have questionnaires to go through, you have topics, that they can talk about. But in general, a parenting plan is going to look different depending upon the state that you're in, depending upon the country that you're in. But the gist of it, and for the most part, I think people get into this thought of like, well, can we just deal with the parenting plan for like what's going to happen now for the next year, right? And then do we really need to think about all these phases of the child and all the way to college? Like, oh my gosh, my kid is only 15 months old. Why am I trying to figure out college? Can you talk to a little bit about whether you should do like a basic parenting plan or a robust parenting plan, or the benefits of like forcing yourself to maybe talk about those long-term topics?
So, like you say, it's different in every state, it's different for every family. If you are in a highly volatile situation with a high conflict spouse and you just cannot communicate without conflict, and you can't do transition days without conflict, then you want to go as far ahead as possible and cement that now so that you don't have to approach that again and bring up that conflict again in 2 years or every year, because that can be costly as well. However, if you're both sitting and willing to mediate and really are not in a high conflict situation, you're just not happy together anymore and you're separating, but you want what's best for your kids, then sure, get something temporary for now. If you know that you guys can agree and you're both fairly child focused, then you don't need to think that far in advance. But where it comes in handy to think far in advance is when there's volatility and conflict and domestic violence cases and all of these situations. That's where you want to go longer term and get it cemented now so that you minimize interactions with each other. Because the more interaction you have, the more conflict potential there's going to be. So that's what this is kind of trying to do, is minimize that interaction and having to speak to each other. When your kids are 15, 16, they've got their own phones, they can communicate with mom and dad. But if you are getting divorced with a 15-month-old baby or a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old, unfortunately, you have to either have something on paper, or you have to be willing to communicate with each other, because the kids can't do it yet. They can't take on that relationship yet. And there is a level of supporting each other through that as well, through that co-parenting.
Well, and I think that the parenting plan has to be as detailed as the person that is the least comfortable with it. So in any situation, as we talk about negotiating a settlement offer, you have to understand that right now, both of you are very intent on figuring out a plan. You're not going to want to come back and do this high level intensive discussion. And when we advise people to work with a parenting specialist, it's because if you create that parenting plan, you could also put into the parenting plan that you will come back to the same specialist. You will come back to the same mediator. You will come back to the same person that assisted you in having that discussion and settle any issues that you disagree upon. But in most cases, if you have both of you at the table, take it as far as you can. Like for the most part, things will change, and those changes may not be in your best interest. And then now we're having a discussion as opposed to maybe have the discussion now. So it gets us towards like some of the essential topics that are covered in a comprehensive parenting plan. One of it is the exchange, but maybe we should go into more details about some of the other pieces.
Yeah, so the basics, like say, include the custody arrangement. Now, bearing in mind there's physical custody and there's legal custody, visitation schedules, holiday splits, decision-making responsibilities for education, healthcare, extracurricular activities. And then adding to that, I often encourage parents to think about transition times, how communication between parents will work, even putting in conflict resolution protocols. So when it is possibly inevitable that at some point conflict is going to arise. Put in that parenting plan, when conflict arises, how are we going to approach that? Who are we, like you say, are we going to go back to the same specialist? Are we going to make use of a mediator, a parenting coordinator, a parenting specialist? But these areas all help address real life challenges and set the tone for that longer term, smoother journey. But that it also includes things like, who's going to pay for the extramurals? When is extended family going to get time with the kids if there's grandparents that live out of state? How are you guys going to accommodate that the kids still build relationships with their cousins and their grandparents on both sides? And unfortunately, that is the thing when you're getting divorced. It's the adults that are making the decisions for the divorce. It's not the children. So I often say, like, it's up to us to suck it up and make sure that we put in place to safeguard the children. If you know that you cannot drop the kids off and see each other every Friday at your house, then put things in place that you don't have to drop them off. Mom drops the kids off on Friday at school. Dad picks them up on Friday after school. You don't have to see each other. Make sure that the kids have duplicates of things so that they're not carting big suitcases every week. There's so many little ways and benefits of working with someone that can make you think outside of the box, because when you're thinking about the finances in the house and the kids and where they're going to live and how you're going to, you can't think outside of the box. But there are definitely ways and someone that can guide you on how best to structure it so that you guys have everything you need and you're minimizing all that conflict. The kids feel secure and safe. But having said that, like you say, things change. Things change all the time. Your kids are going to change. Maybe you didn't put in your parenting plan, what is your dating rule? When can your daughter start dating? What is the curfew? What is your teenage daughter's curfew? What is their internet access? When are they allowed to get an Instagram account or a, these things I didn't think of them when I was getting divorced. You're just thinking about how much time am I getting with my kids?
Right.
That's basically all they're thinking about, is how much time and how we splitting, how are we going to make the funds fair, like the finances fair.
Well, and I think that even if you back up and when you're going into figuring out the parenting plan, putting together a list of like your priorities, what holidays are important to you, what things do you do with extended family that are important to you, getting us, and you can't go run to a mediator or a child parenting specialist or a therapist every single time that you have an issue. So you almost have to have other ways that you even communicate. Like, okay, we have an emergency issue, what am I going to have to email you or text you or communicate? Are we using some outside third party communication app? How are we sharing the expenses and paying each other back or reimbursing each other and things like that? And I think for the most part, the only way you're going to go to that level of depth is if you work with a specialist or you pull together, a lot of these things you can Google and get templates and work through. It's just that it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And it's like, I don't know if Instagram is even going to be there. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if things are going to be there whenever my kid gets there. So it's almost even good if both of you are coming to mediation, or if you're coming to a situation where you're just having to push the parenting plan back to your spouse and then you make some changes and then you send it to them. Having your priorities in order, like I always want spring break. A lot of times those are actually places where you can agree. It's like, oh yes, Easter is really important to my family and we're always going to have Easter. The other parent might be like, yeah, don't care, right? Like, we know that that's what you like to do and I've never liked to do it. So this is perfect. Or, Christmas is important, or Christmas Eve is important, or Hanukkah. Those types of things, sometimes that's actually a good starting point because you guys will agree up front to some basic things, get those out of the way, and then go deeper in the conversation. Now, the reason why you should have several topics of this conversation, is because you're going to miss some things, right? And it's going to get overwhelming. Like there's only so much we can talk about in an hour until we're just like, okay, I need a break kind of thing. And so what are some of the areas or issues that you think are frequently overlooked when drafting a parenting plan and kind of maybe people wouldn't know about?
I personally feel it's the emotional and the developmental needs of the children. People think that, well, I've got a 3-year-old, I want 50-50. Younger kids don't do well with longer transitions away from both parents. So you need to consider maybe for the next 2 years, we're going to do 3 days on, 3 days off and work towards 1 week on, 1 week off. Maybe your teenagers want more input in their own schedule because they've got social lives as well. So maybe they're happier to do 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So people tend to overlook the emotional and developmental phase of their children and take that into consideration and take into consideration that that is going to shift. That is going to constantly shift, and you need to be open to and receptive to those changes as the kids grow older. Some of the other areas that often get overlooked are those, how are we going to communicate? You mentioned it earlier. I've seen a lot of parenting plans that don't say we are going to use this mode of communication, only written emails, or we're going to use this co-parenting app. Co-parenting apps are amazing. It can track the finances and it can track the kids' schedules and doctor's appointments. And sometimes what gets overlooked is kids with additional needs. How are you going to care for that? Who's taking the kids to the physio? People get stuck on how much time they're getting with the kids, but not focused on they're looking at the quantity. They're not looking at the quality of time. And I think that people are more often than not focused on that ratio, that 60-40. And people ask you, so how much time did you get? Oh, I got 50%, or oh, I only got 30%. If you got 30%, but you can spend that full 30% not even working and you're only with your kids in that 30%, that is way better for your kids than having 50%, but half the time, half of your 50%, they are with a babysitter or with childcare somewhere, with someone else is looking after them if you don't have first right of refusal. So, I think the emotional phases, the developmental phases, and the communication often gets looked over.
Well, and I think if you start to separate some of the kids' issues from the financial issues, like a lot of times, we're telling people to really look at the parenting plan as a standalone, and then figure out, because it could be, that one parent can always pick up the kid from school or always be available after school, but that limits the capability for them to have a full-time job, and so then let's take that plan and then make the financial considerations after we've determined what's best for the child. And you've hit the nail on the head in the fact that this is a process about the child or the children. This is not, is it convenient for me or you? Like, really, ideally, a nesting concept is better for the child because the child stays at the house and the parents come in and out. And if that idea of you coming in for a week and then going to an apartment for a week and then switching off and off, if that seems really uncomfortable, like, I don't want to live that life, that's the life that your kids are now being forced to live. And you have to have a perspective that that's uncomfortable. So how do you make it better? But you said a couple things about the emotional. And I think that if you have a kid that has special needs or emotional needs that already has a therapist, or you have a family therapist, that therapist or family therapist is not an unbiased parenting specialist. Okay. They are very connected to the kid. They could be very connected to one parent or the other. So they're going to seem biased by the other parent. And so it's really that they could be pulled in with the, like you have to look at the parenting specialist as like a mediator for the parenting plan, right? And that they're just working with you for that issue. If there's important pieces for the therapist to tell you, then I would get them to write that in a letter. Like, these are some of the things that would be very important for the child, at this developmental level, with their anxiety, with their, ADHD, with any of those things that they're struggling with. If you believe that the therapist has some beneficial to say, get them to put it in writing, provide it to the mediator or the parenting specialist. And then the schedules is an important issue, because there's a lot of apps, like we use Cozy, COZI, and it's a way that each person can put things into a calendar, and and we add the kids. The kids have access to it. The parents, even sometimes grandparents, have access to it. And it's really kind of the kids' calendar, if you will. And so I'm putting in, now we have practice on Wednesday, and that kind of messes things up. But like, let's put it in the calendar so that everybody knows about it. Then you have the parenting plan that's going to determine what happens when a schedule gets changed. Like, what's the default? What's the first right of refusal, which we use in a lot of situations. But, this kind of gets us to what could emerge as, like, if you don't, like, let's say you're just like, we figured it out and we get along pretty well together, which is what I hear a lot of people say. Like, we get along okay around the kids, and I think we can figure it out. The problem is, if child support comes late that month and you get mad and you get ticked off, you're going to then maybe make some actions that are not totally, like, you're going to get into an emotional state, and you're going to then be like, well, we never had an agreement, right? Or the other person gets frustrated. Well, we never had an agreement. We didn't agree to that. I thought we agreed to this. Like, you don't want to leave interpretation on the agreement. Like, be very specific. But have you seen some things that happen if you really don't take time with this agreement?
Yeah, I basically used the word ambiguity in the agreement often leads to disputes, which then can mean more court visits, higher costs down the line. From the parenting specialist perspective, for the children, it leads to more confusion. It leads to instability for them, emotional stress. And that's why it's really important to focus on the children and what is best for them through. So leaving things out, and yeah, it's fine, we'll discuss it when it comes up. When that thing comes up, or that child main support doesn't come through, your first instinct is, well, fine, if you're not going to pay for them, you're not going to see them. Like, you see that all the time, and that's unfortunate. That's your own emotional response or reaction, and that's not what's best for the kids, because they are none the wiser whether the support has come in or not. They don't know if it's come in a day or two late. So your emotional stress then causes that emotional stress for the kids. And I've said this many times, it's not the divorce that affects kids. It's the conflict and the emotional stress around it that causes issues for the kids in the longer term. So ambiguity, not covering things in the agreement, is going to lead to disputes further down the line.
Well, and I think that we think that kids don't feel this stuff. Like, they can feel if you're uncomfortable. They can feel if you're aggravated or frustrated, and you're going to be emotional about that if the other parent isn't there, right? Like, you're going to be more outwardly frustrated. Again, anytime that you are coming to the table to negotiate something in a divorce, the assumption has to be that something has fell apart in the divorce, whatever it is. Typically, communication is one of them. And instead of worrying about something in the future, as much as you can agree to, as much as you can say, you know what, the future of college, maybe we can't determine, but we have some grandparents that are going to put money aside, and we're going to use that first. And then we're going to look at that rationale and say, well, up to, I mean, colleges are getting way more expensive than anything else. You guys might have an agreement that no one pays for it, that it's a discussion with the child at that time. Again, you're trying to also get in a situation where you're not putting the kids in the middle of the conflict. And so the more that it's just like, oh, well, this is how we deal with it, they know that things can happen and it doesn't matter if it happens, we can still get through it. So kind of finally in this conversation, what are some of the strategies that you've seen divorcing couples use that kind of efficiently, amicably kind of agree on a parenting plan, and that like our listeners could maybe utilize even now without a specialist?
Shifting your mindset, trying to come to the table with the mindset of collaboration instead of competition. This sounds so, I don't know how this sounds, but practicing empathy and putting yourself in your children's shoes. You said it so beautifully earlier, Melissa. Like, if you feel uncomfortable moving between homes, that is what you are asking your kids to do. And they didn't ask for you to get divorced. They didn't ask for this. So think about what you are asking of your kids and what you are expecting your kids to just deal with, put up with, just put on your big boy pants and carry on. Then you should be able to do that. So practicing some empathy and shifting that focus from what do I want to what does my child need? What does my child need from us both now? And even if you're in mediation, or even if you're busy drawing up your own parenting plan to present to the other parent, these are my suggestions. Have your non-negotiables. Maybe it is Christmas. Maybe your non-negotiable, maybe you've got 3 non-negotiables and they're okay with your non-negotiables. So have those 3, have your non-negotiables, and then everything else needs to be collaboration.
Well, I think that you make a very good point about refocusing on the kids. And I also think, I have the benefit of some teenagers, and they need mental health days. They need like their comfort items, their comfort room, like they just need breaks. And I think that as the kids get older, one thing that you have to keep in mind is like a 3-day on, a 3-day off, a 3-day on, a 3-day off, that I'm transferring twice a week. At some point when the kids get older, having a way that they can have conversations with you and that you can understand that, well, I just want to stay at mom's house for, and have some days off makes sense, right? And it's not like that it's against you or your parenting, but it creates that you need to make a welcoming home. It doesn't need to be a big home. It needs to be a welcoming, comfortable, things that they love that make them feel at home need to be present in both spaces, so that when they need that time off, they're like, oh, well, I can go have that time off at dad's house. I can go have that time off at, like, mentally just like sit in their room or play games or, chill with their animals or whatever it is. If they're choosing to be at one house or the other for that time, that is for that parent to reflect on, have I made this house a place that they belong and they feel that they can relax, or does it feel like they are a guest, right? And those are things that each parent has to do independently at their own house. If the kid wants to stay at the other house, it's not always just the parenting, right? It's not that I get away with things. It's not that, oh, mom has a pool and dad has a hot tub. It's not about those things. It's how they feel when they're at that house. Do they feel like they're at home? And this parenting plan should help you so that you're more focused on making them feel at home than trying to regulate the schedule so that you get all the time it's not fair. It's not fair. Like, is the kid saying that? Are you listening? Are you having a way that you can have that conversation as they get older and say, hey, maybe like teenagers might want to be at one house during the week, right? Because that's where they're going to school, and and it's hard to get up at 6 a.m. and then a parent has to drive you a half an hour. Like, think about the child at the center of this, and I think you will make a decision that's even better. Do you have any other kind of suggestions for people that are getting started in this process?
Yeah, write it down. Write all the things, write your schedules, write it out. Just keep writing it out, and you know, put yourself consistently, as Melissa says, put yourself consistently in your kids' shoes. Don't take it personally every time, especially if you have teenagers. It could be that there's a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a friend that's closer to dad's house, and it's got nothing to do with dad. It's got everything to do with the best friend that lives 2 blocks away. Or there's a party happening at closer to mom's house, and mom maybe said she could stay till 12. Like, it's not a personal attack always. So don't feel like it's personal, especially the older your kids get. It's not personal. Look at what's going on in their world. What is their world? What's happening in their world, in their social life? What is happening for them?
This was awesome, Cristin. I appreciate this so much. We're actually going to talk
Okay.
more about those concepts in the next one, because you do have to do some of your own self-care and stop making this all be about you and your spouse. So I love this. Thank you so much. And we will see you soon.